In 1940, Romania lost a third of its territory in less than 90 days, without firing a single shot, without declaring war on anyone, without signing a single surrender in battle. Bessarabia and Northern Bukovina were snatched by Stalin through an ultimatum on June 28. Northern Transylvania was handed over by Hitler to Hungary on August 30. Southern Dobruja was ceded by the Romanian government to Bulgaria on September 7. 3 blows in 70 days. The kingdom's population plummeted from 19.9 million to 13.3 million inhabitants. 1/3 of the arable territory, almost half of the forests, 3/4 of the sunflower crops, vanished from the map in less than one summer. How did a country reach the brink of total collapse in peacetime? How did it respond to that catastrophe? And what price did it pay for the decisions it made next? This is the story of Romania in the Second World War. The dream began in August 1916, Greater Romania. Romania Mare did not exist yet. There was a modest kingdom sandwiched between empires that coveted its lands, its rivers, and its oil wells. King Ferdinand I, a monarch of German origin who signed a declaration of war against his own country of birth, took the boldest decision in recent Romanian history, joining the Entente with the promise of receiving Transylvania, Bukovina, and part of the Pannonian Plain. The price was devastating. The Romanian army crossed the Carpathians with enthusiasm, but without sufficient preparation. Austro-Hungarian troops, quickly reinforced by German divisions, crushed the initial offensive. By December 1916, the Germans had taken Bucharest. The government and the army took refuge in Moldavia, in the northeastern tip of the country, while the rest of the territory remained under occupation. It was at that moment when a young staff colonel named Ion Antonescu demonstrated his value for the first time. Fighting under the command of General Constantin Prezan in the defense of Moldavia, Antonescu contributed decisively to the tactical planning of the Battle of Marasesti, fought between August and September 1917. In that battle, the most intense on the Romanian front during the entire First World War, the Romanian divisions halted the offensive of German Marshal August von Mackensen. Pe aici nu se trece, they shall not pass, became the war cry of a nation that refused to disappear. But the tactical victory at Marasesti could not compensate for the strategic collapse caused by the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. Without the Eastern ally, Romania signed a humiliating peace in Bufte in May 1918, ceding territories and resources to the German Empire. Defeat seemed total. Then came the geopolitical miracle. The collapse of the Central Powers in November 1918 transformed the defeated into victors. At the Paris Peace Conference, Romania received all it had been promised and more. Transylvania, Bukovina, Bessarabia, part of historical Hungary, the kingdom's territory almost doubled overnight. Romania Mare. Greater Romania was no longer a dream, it was a cartographic reality, but the dream carried within it the seed of the problem. The new territories brought with them Hungarian, German, Jewish, Ukrainian, and Bulgarian minorities. It is estimated that around 30% of the population in some of the newly incorporated regions was ethnically non-Romanian. Budapest never accepted the loss of Transylvania. Sofia claimed southern Dobruja. Moscow did not recognize Romanian sovereignty over Bessarabia, which Russia had controlled since 1812. Greater Romania was born with 3 declared enemies on its borders. To defend itself, the Bucharest government bet on 3 pillars: the League of Nations, the alliance with France, and a network of regional pacts. In 1921, Romania, Yugoslavia, and Czechoslovakia formed the Little Entente to resist Hungarian revisionism. That same year, a mutual defense treaty was signed with Poland directed against a possible Soviet aggression. Nicolae Titulescu, the brilliant Romanian foreign minister, elected president of the Assembly of the League of Nations in 1930 and re-elected in 1931, was the embodiment of that diplomacy of balance. Revisionism means war, Titulescu repeated before every threat of revision of the Versailles treaties. But there was another problem within Romania, one that did not come from outside. In October 1923, a 24-year-old university student named Corneliu Zelea Codreanu organized a plot in Iasi to assassinate several Romanian politicians. The reason? They had supported a constitutional amendment granting citizenship to Jews. The plot was discovered. Codreanu was arrested, tried, and acquitted. Upon leaving prison, he had a vision. In the prison chapel, he described in his autobiography having seen the archangel Michael, who ordered him to dedicate his life to God and to the spiritual regeneration of Romania. Codreanu's mysticism was genuine and completely sincere. Unlike Mussolini or Hitler, he did not build his movement on the machinery of the state nor on the cynicism of opportunism. He built it on rituals of communion, blood vows, unpaid community work in poor villages, and a visceral hatred toward Jews, whom he considered the agent of Jewish Bolshevism, poisoning Romania's spiritual roots. In 1927, Codreanu founded the Legion of the Archangel Michael. 3 years later, he created the Iron Guard as its militant political wing. The movement grew vertiginously during the years of the Great Depression, when the economic ruin of the peasants and the flagrant corruption of the parliamentary parties made the Guard the only political force that seemed to have principles. In the elections of December 1937, the Guard obtained 66 parliamentary seats, becoming the third political force in the country with 15.6% of the votes. King Carol II watched this rise with a mixture of contempt and fear. Carol was one of the most complex and morally compromised characters of interwar Europe. He had voluntarily abdicated in 1925 to live with his lover Magda Lupescu in voluntary exile in France. In 1930, he returned to Romania under irregular circumstances and assumed the throne, displacing his own son Michael, who had reigned briefly as a child king. The historian Hugh Seaton Watson described him as superficially brilliant and basically ignorant, endowed with enormous energy and boundless lust for power. Carol admired Mussolini and set out to imitate him, combining terrorist methods with the most ingrained Balkan tradition of corruption and intrigue. To neutralize the Guard without completely destroying it because he feared it, and because he needed it as a parliamentary counterweight against traditional parties, Carol abolished the Constitution of 1923 in February 1938 and established a royal dictatorship. The Guard was declared illegal. Codreanu was arrested under fabricated charges of treason and sentenced to 10 years of forced labor. 6 months later, on the night of November 29 to 30, 1938, Codreanu was strangled in prison along with 13 of his comrades. The bodies were secretly buried on the grounds of the Jilava prison. The official statement announced that they had died while attempting to escape. Carol had committed an irreparable error. Codreanu's martyrdom did not destroy the Guard, it immortalized it. Ion Antonescu was born on June 2, 1882 in Pitești, a city in southern Romania, into a middle-class family whose father was an army officer. He was baptized in the Orthodox faith and sent from childhood to military schools. On July 1, 1904, after 2 years at the Infantry and Cavalry School, he began his service in the Romanian Army with the rank of second lieutenant. His character was defined from the beginning. The French general Victor Pétain, military attaché in Bucharest, wrote about him in 1920. Extremely hard-working, of great military value, but extremely vain regarding his person and his country, chauvinistic, xenophobic. In 1922, when Antonescu was stationed as a military attaché in Paris, Pétain was even more direct. Proven intelligence, brutal, duplicitous, fierce will to succeed, Antonescu deserves a special place in the Romanian army. During the First World War, Antonescu acted as chief of operations under the command of Trăițan and contributed decisively to the planning of the resistance in Moldavia. It was in those years when he forged his reputation as the most capable and most uncomfortable officer of the Romanian army. Uncomfortable because he did not tolerate ineptitude, corruption, or dishonesty, and his frankness earned him more enemies than friends among the political class. In 1933, he was appointed Chief of the General Staff. His priority was to modernize an army that he considered equipped with antiquated weaponry and incapable of defending the country's borders. When the government rejected his rearmament proposals, he submitted his resignation in December 1934. Carroll kept him under police surveillance and relegated him to political ostracism. But Antonescu had the support of the army, and in moments of crisis, that support was worth more than any political party. His relationship with the Iron Guard was complex and ambivalent. In 1936, he met with Codreanu for the first time. He found him arrogant but committed to the purification of the political system. When in 1938 Carroll ordered the captain's arrest, Antonescu appeared as a defense witness at his trial before the military court, where he dramatically shook Codreanu's hand before the courtroom full of journalists and challenged the court. Would General Antonescu shake hands with a traitor? The gesture cost him house arrest in pre-deal. Carroll hated him and feared him in equal measure. The summer of 1940 changed everything. To understand the summer of 1941, must understand the winter of 1938. Interwar Romania had built its external security on three pillars: the League of Nations, the alliance with France, and the network of regional pacts. In 1920, Foreign Minister Nicolae Titulescu had helped create the Little Entente, along with Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia, to contain Hungarian revisionism. In 1921, a mutual defense treaty with Poland created a shield against the Soviet threat. And since 1932, when Titulescu assumed the foreign ministry, Romania actively pursued a collective security agreement with the Soviet Union. Revisionism means war, he repeated before every threat of revision of the Versailles treaties. The permanent stumbling block was Bessarabia. Moscow had never recognized Romanian sovereignty over the province, which Russia had controlled since 1812. In July 1936, Titulescu and the Soviet Commissar Litvinov agreed on the general principles of a mutual assistance pact, but a single article divided them. Titulescu insisted that the pact enter into force only if France acted first under the Franco-Soviet treaty. Litvinov refused. Before resolving the impasse, Carroll dismissed Titulescu in August 1936 and sent him into exile. With him disappeared the only real possibility of anchoring Romania in a multilateral system before Hitler altered the European balance. The Munich Agreement of September 1938 buried the last remains of that system. If the Western powers had sacrificed Czechoslovakia, a state more powerful than Romania, with explicit guarantees from France, what value did Romanian guarantees have? Karl Clodius, deputy director of the Economic Policy Department of the German Foreign Ministry, diagnosed the change in atmosphere. Even Germany's declared opponents now speak a completely different language. There is no doubt that this change is due not to sympathy for Germany, but solely to realistic political considerations, often even to fear. Meanwhile, the Voltat Treaty of March 23, 1939, linked the Romanian economy increasingly to Germany. German participation in Romanian foreign trade reached 51% of imports and 44% of exports in 1940. Great Britain and France offered unilateral guarantees on April 13, 1939, but they were scraps of paper. They obligated the West to protect Romania if it defended itself without demanding any reciprocity and without real military capacity to fulfill them from so far away. Thus, Romania reached the summer of 1940, diplomatically isolated, economically dependent on Germany, and militarily inferior to any of its neighbors. On June 26, 1940, shortly before midnight, Molotov summoned the Romanian minister in Moscow to the Kremlin with an ultimatum: cede Bessarabia and Northern Bukovina in 24 hours. What Bucharest did not know was that Germany had already recognized that Soviet interest in the secret protocol of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of August 1939. The German side declares its complete political disinterestedness in these territories. When Bucharest appealed to Berlin, Ribbentrop responded on June 27, recommending the acceptance of the ultimatum and warning that Germany could not guarantee military assistance if Romania resisted. Karol had spent months trying to obtain German border guarantees. Now he discovered that Berlin had negotiated those borders behind his back almost a year earlier. Karol yielded. He convened a Crown Council that voted 19-10 in favor of accepting. The withdrawal was an organizational disaster. The British military attaché concluded that the retreat was generally very poorly executed and many units never received orders, with more than 40,000 soldiers captured or missing. The ceded region covered 50,762 square kilometers with 3,776,000 inhabitants, more than half ethnically Romanian. The economic losses were quantifiable and devastating. 37% of arable land, 44% of forests, 75% of sunflower crops, 86% of soybeans. But the psychological trauma was deeper than the economic one. When the Romanian troops were withdrawing under the June rain, they were met in some localities with insults, spitting, and red flags. Military reports described groups of local Jews celebrating the Soviet arrival, tearing off officers' insignia, deploying communist flags. The reporter Elefteri Nagel from the newspaper Universal published a chronicle steeped in crusade language. Thus, the communist Jews began their evil works against the holy places. King Karol noted in his diary, "The behavior of the population in Bessarabia, especially that of the Jews, leaves much to be desired." What these reports hid was documented by the Romanian army's own investigations. Of the active communist officials in Bessarabia before the Soviet deportations, 505 were Romanians and only 69 were Jews. In Belgrade, it was the Bulgarian population who attacked the retreating soldiers. In several cities, the businesses destroyed by the communists belonged predominantly to the Jewish middle class. The Federation of Jewish Communities published declarations of loyalty, "The Romanian soil, generously watered with the blood of our best sons, fallen in the War of Independence of 1877, which did not reach the ears of any retreating officer." The first concrete violence arrived on July 1, 1940. 52 Jews shot in Dorohoi by retreating troops, Jews thrown from moving trains in Moldavia, shot by gendarmerie officers. The logic of reprisal was in motion before any government ordered it. Sensing blood, Hungary and Bulgaria presented their own claims. On August 30, 1940, at the Belvedere Palace in Vienna, Ribbentrop and Ciano presented the map they had already drawn according to their own interests. Prime Minister Gigutu's desperate letter, "Transylvania has always been considered by us as a fortress of Romanianness," was ignored. Northern Transylvania, 43,104 square kilometers with 2.6 million people, passed to Hungary. The new border did not respond to ethnic criteria. By pushing it to the southern Carpathian chain, Ribbentrop gave the Reich a natural defensive wall, while the line ran only a few kilometers from the Ploiesti oil fields, vital for the plan of attack on the Soviet Union. Romanian Foreign Minister Mihail Manolescu fainted over the table upon seeing the map. The reaction was a political earthquake. Tens of thousands of Romanians flooded the streets. Guardsmen fired under the windows of the royal palace and occupied Radio Bucharest. Some 110,000 officials emigrated from northern Transylvania in the following months. On September 7, the Treaty of Craiova ceded southern Dobruja to Bulgaria with an exchange of 103,711 Romanians for 62,278 Bulgarians. In 90 days, Romania had lost a third of its territory and a third of its population without firing a shot. The insurrection was swift. General Koroama refused to fire against the crowd in front of the palace. The army, which has let our territory be invaded without firing a shot, would refuse. It was the army's verdict on its own king. Fabricius eliminated any remaining doubt on the night of September 5. "The Reich does not value that he remain here, and I am studying the train schedules for him." On September 6, 1940, shortly after 6 in the morning, Karol II signed his abdication in favor of his 19-year-old son. He left the country that same day, taking art collections, jewelry, and treasures under a rain of bullets fired by guardsmen who pursued him to the border. Ion Antonescu, recently released from house arrest, was summoned to the palace to receive full powers as conducătorul statului, the leader of the state. On September 14, 1940, King Michael signed the decree proclaiming Romania as a national legionary state. Ion Antonescu was defined as chief of the legionary state and head of the legionary regime. Horia Sima, the new leader of the Iron Guard after Codreanu's assassination, was appointed vice president of the Council of Ministers. It was the beginning of one of the most chaotic and bloody political experiments in recent Romanian history. Antonescu and the Iron Guard were not natural allies. The general was a military man of order, obsessed with discipline, hierarchy, and efficient administration of the state. The Guard was a mystical and violent organization, steeped in orthodox mysticism, rabid anti-Semitism, and an insatiable appetite for revenge. What united them was the shared hatred for the corruption of the political class and anti-Semitism, although of different intensity and mutual necessity. Antonescu needed the Guard's popular support, and the Guard needed the army's legitimacy. From day one, coexistence was impossible. The Guardsmen were designated prefects in all the country's departments overnight. The Legionary Police Iron Guard. The Legionary Police replaced the state police in many cities. The confiscations of Jewish properties, authorized by decree since October 1940, rural lands on October 5, forests and mills on November 12, vessels on December 4, were executed by legionary commissars who in many cases kept the loot instead of handing it over to the state. 5 British oil managers were kidnapped by the Guard, tortured, and forced to sign confessions admitting to sabotage. The German newspaper Neubacher, the Reich's special representative for economic affairs in Romania, warned the Ministry of Economy in Berlin in November 1940. The time has come to put an end to the anarchists and experimenters of the Guard. But the breaking point arrived on the night of November 26 to 27. The Guardsmen performing the exhumations of Codreanu's remains at the Jilava prison learned that 2 political figures responsible under Carol's regime had been transferred to a sanatorium instead of remaining detained. The response was immediate and monstrous. The Guardsmen stormed the cells of Jilava and massacred 64 ministers and high-ranking police officers whom they considered responsible for the murder of their comrades. In Ploiesti that same night, 11 Jews were murdered. The next day, a group of Guardsmen murdered Nicolae Iorga, the great Romanian historian and statesman, and Virgil Madgheru, former finance minister of the National Peasants' Party. Antonescu was horrified, not for moral reasons first, but because the chaos threatened his authority and the German economic interests he had promised to protect. He requested an urgent meeting with Hitler. On January 14, 1941, he flew to the Obersalzberg and presented his charges against the Guard directly to the Führer. Hitler, who was already preparing Operation Barbarossa and needed a stable Romania as a logistical base, gave him enough signals of support so that Antonescu felt backed. The final trigger arrived on January 19, 1941, when Major Düring, a German officer attached to the Reich's military mission in Bucharest, was murdered in front of the Hotel Ambassador. Antonescu seized the incident to dismiss the Legionary Minister of Interior, General Constantin Petrovicescu. The Guard's response was the uprising. During the morning of January 22, groups of Guardsmen roamed the Jewish quarter of Bucharest, looting and burning houses, and murdering 120 Jews in cold blood. That same day, Antonescu ordered the army to use tanks against the buildings where the rebels had entrenched themselves. 21 soldiers died in the operations. By the afternoon, the positions had been recovered. Horia Sima, smuggled out of Bucharest in the automobile of the German diplomat Neubacher, was transferred to Germany, where the Iron Guard would maintain a ghostly existence under the surveillance of the SD, always available as a latent threat against Antonescu in case he deviated from German designs. On January 27, 1941, Antonescu formed a new cabinet composed almost entirely of officers. Romania was now a military dictatorship. There is a scene in the history of Romania that summarizes the entire tragedy of Ion Antonescu. On June 12, 1941, the general traveled to Munich to meet with Hitler. He was the first ally to be informed of Operation Barbarossa. The Führer announced to him that the attack on the Soviet Union was imminent. Each ally will participate in the common glory, he proclaimed. Antonescu approved without hesitation. But before that encounter, on the plane toward Germany, Antonescu confessed to the Romanian minister in Berlin, Raoul Bossi, that he already knew of the imminent war thanks to General Hansen of the German military mission, and that he could advance toward the east as much as he wanted. His declared objective was to recover Bessarabia and Northern Bukovina, snatched by Stalin a year earlier, and then use diplomatic pressure to recover northern Transylvania, ceded to Hungary in the Vienna arbitration. But once that area has been cleared of Jews and Russians, Antonescu said, a diplomatic campaign will open to recover the north of Transylvania. Antonescu's strategy was simple in its logic and devastating in its implications, aligning with Germany not out of ideology but out of convenience, recovering what was lost in 1940, using the war against the Soviet Union as leverage to renegotiate the Vienna arbitration with Hitler, and waiting. The problem was that this logic would lead him much further beyond the borders of 1939. On the morning of June 22, 1941, Antonescu issued his order of the day to the troops. Soldiers, I order you to cross the Prut River. Let us crush the enemy to the east and the north. Let us liberate our enslaved brothers from the yoke of Bolshevism. Restore to our homeland's body the ancestral land of the Bessarab line, the princely forests of Bukovina. The streets of Bucharest exploded in joy. Gheorghe Barbul, secretary to Mihai Antonescu, described the scene. People leaning out of windows shouting, "War, war with Russia." Crowds running toward the royal palace, martial marches at full volume from the radios, and suddenly a profound silence when the prayers began and people knelt in the street. Romania entered the war with nearly 585,000 soldiers participating in the attack on the Soviet Union, more than all of Germany's other allies combined. The first results were exactly what Antonescu expected. The Romanian Third Army, under the command of General Petre Dumitrescu, advanced toward northern Bukovina, occupying its administrative capital Cernăuți on July 4. The campaign in Bessarabia was slower but equally successful. By July 27, 1941, the Romanian troops had recovered all the territories snatched by the Soviet ultimatum of June 1940, at the cost of 4,112 dead, 12,120 wounded, and 5,506 missing. King Michael promoted Antonescu to the rank of Marshal on August 22 in recognition of the reconquest. In Bucharest, the joy was genuine and overflowing. For most Romanians, the recovery of Bessarabia and Bukovina was an act of historical justice, the correction of a humiliation they had suffered under the threat of Soviet arms just 12 months earlier. But even before the reconquest ended, Antonescu had made the decision that would turn his regime into one of the co-responsible for war crimes among the most serious perpetrated during the Second World War outside of Nazi Germany. From the first weeks of the campaign, General Constantin Vasiliu, head of the gendarmerie in the Ministry of Interior, had transmitted to the gendarmerie units the order to clear the ground of Jews in rural areas. The policy was clear: exterminate on the spot all Jews from rural areas, lock them in ghettos in the cities, and arrest all those suspected of communist sympathies. Vasiliu's orders for the gendarmerie were explicit. The Jewish minority must be pursued with the maximum rigor. In July and August 1941, between 12,000 and 20,000 Jews were shot by German and Romanian forces in Bessarabia and Bukovina. The Romanian battalions of the 9th Mountain Regiment, commanded by Colonel Carlin, executed in Noua Sulita between July 8 and 10 about 800 people in streets and homes. In Ciudad, Colonel Valeriu Carp ordered the murder of almost the entire Jewish population, between 450 and 572 victims. In Cernăuți, more than 2,000 Jews were murdered in the first 24 hours after the entry of Romanian troops on July 6. The German Einsatzgruppen themselves, the SS mobile extermination units, expressed their irritation not at the cruelty of the Romanian actions, but at their disorganization. A report from July 31, 1941 complained, "The Romanians act against the Jews without any plan. No one would object to the numerous executions of Jews if the technical aspect of their preparation, as well as the way they are carried out, did not leave so much to be desired. The Romanians leave the executed where they fall without burying them." May 31, 1941. 4 weeks from the start of Barbarossa, the city of Iași, historical capital of Moldavia, with a population of 100,000 inhabitants, of whom approximately half were Jews, was a bomb about to explode. The German troops operating in the area considered the Jews spies and potential saboteurs. The Gestapo, the SD, and the Geheime Feldpolizei operated in the city under a mantle of paranoia. 2 Soviet bombings on June 25 and 26 had provoked a collective psychosis about supposed signalers who guided enemy planes from the ground with radios, torches, or red cloths. Sergeant Mircea Manoliu, former member of the Iron Guard attached to the 14th Division, was the first to act. On June 26, he escorted 3 already detained Jews to the garrison shooting range and shot them. 1 died, another escaped. 3 days later, on June 28, a German patrol began to gather thousands of Jews in the police headquarters courtyard. The columns were forced to run the gauntlet of Romanian and German soldiers, members of the organization TOT, and gendarmes who spat, insulted, and threw stones. By 1 in the afternoon, there were some 3,500 suspects, mostly Jews, in the police headquarters courtyard. What happened next is one of the most documented acts of barbarism in Romanian history. Around 2 in the afternoon, the Jews concentrated in the headquarters courtyard were subjected to a rain of gunfire that lasted until 6 in the evening, with an interruption while General Stavrescu attempted unsuccessfully to persuade the Germans to stop the killing. The number of victims in the courtyard was several hundred. Estimates vary, but German diplomatic sources in Bucharest cited at least 4,000 dead in total in Iași. But the nightmare had not ended. About 2,500 survivors were taken from the headquarters and driven with blows to the train station. On June 30, 2 freight trains departed from Iași with Jews packed into sealed wagons under the July heat. The first, known as the Death Train, carried between 2,430 and 2,530 people in almost 40 goods wagons. The boards nailed over the wagon's vents prevented air from entering, without water, without food. While the train traveled erratically, the 500 kilometers separating it from its destination in Călărași, taking 6.5 days, the passengers drank their own urine, went mad, and died. When the wagons were opened at intermediate stations, the survivors saw that their traveling companions had died. In Târgu Frumos, the corpses were unloaded by gypsies who accepted the work, tempted by the possibility of finding shoes and clothes on the bodies. In the wagon they found 80-90 corpses for every 140-145 people. More than 1,400 Jews died on that train. The 1,011 survivors reached Călărași on July 6. The second train was equally deadly. Of the 1,902 people embarked, 1,194 died and were buried in the cemetery of the village of Podul Iloai. Antonescu learned the details of the murders in Iași on his command train in Moldova. On the night of June 30, he transmitted to the units in Iași General Ion Antonescu's order. General Antonescu ordered that all Jewish communists in Iași and all those found with red flags and firearms be executed tonight. However, at the same time, Antonescu initiated an investigation into the excesses. On July 4, he transmitted to the police and the gendarmerie an order that recognized what occurred as a disorder that had placed the army and authorities in a completely unfavorable light and prohibited any individual action. The double-message condemnation of chaos, combined with an anti-Semitic ultimatum, would be the signature of his regime for the following 3 years. On August 3, 1941, Romanian troops crossed the Dniester River and began to advance toward Odessa in the territories that had been Soviet before 1939. Antonescu did not stop at the 1939 borders. Not because the Germans demanded it, although they pushed him in that direction. Not solely for military reasons, but because, as he declared to a meeting of the Council of Ministers on September 6, 1941, history is written with the sword. If we do not have powerful allies, we would lose it. In the war we are fighting, after taking Bessarabia, could I have stopped? For Antonescu, the campaign beyond the Dniester had three objectives. The first was strategic, to destroy Soviet fortifications in Transnistria and reduce Russian military power. The second was geopolitical, to have a territorial card to play in peace negotiations, preferably to exchange Transnistria for the northern Transylvania that Hungary still held. The third, the darkest one, was demographic, to purify the reconquered territories of what he called foreign elements, starting with the Jews. My main goal is not the borders, but the homogeneity and purity of our race, Antonescu told the governors of the new provinces, and that is my main goal. On August 30, 1941, through the Tighina Agreement between Romania and Germany, Antonescu assumed administration of the region between the Dniester and the Bug. That region, named Transnistria, became de facto the dumping ground to which the Romanian regime would deport the Jews of Bessarabia, Bukovina, and later Odessa. Deportations began in September 1941. Colonel Teodor Meculescu, head of the Gendarmerie Inspectorate in Bessarabia, received verbal instructions. Send the Jews in convoys of 1,600 people crossing the Dniester. The secret code for those who could not keep up with the marching pace was Alexianu, the name of the governor of Transnistria, and it meant execution on the spot. A gendarmerie lieutenant, Augustin Rosca, described in his statement how he received orders from the Army General Staff, so that 2 days before the departure of each convoy, ditches were dug every 10 kilometers that could hold about 100 corpses, to bury those who had fallen behind and had been shot. The peasants in the villages along the routes learned of what was going to occur. Therefore they waited at the edge of the road, hidden in the cornfields, waiting for the executions to take place to throw themselves upon the corpses and rob them. Between September and November 1941, more than 147,000 Jews from Bukovina and Bessarabia were deported to Transnistria. At least 90,000 of them died mostly of typhus and hunger during the winter of 1941-1942. Antonescu had no compassion for them. In a meeting of the Council of Ministers on November 13, when Governor Alexianu asked for disinfection equipment because typhus was spreading among the deportees, the marshal responded, "Let those people keep dying." The horror culminated in Bogdanovka, an agricultural estate in Golta County on the banks of the Bug. In November 1941, some 48,000 Jews were crowded into the estate's stables. The mortality rate had risen to 500 per day. Prefect Modest Isopescu received a verbal order from Alexianu for the Jews of the camp to be shot. The Romanian gendarmes themselves refused, not for moral scruples, but because the scale of the task overwhelmed them. The work was finally entrusted to the local Ukrainian police under the command of Afanasy Andrushin. On December 21, 1941, the Bogdanovka massacre began. The sick and invalid were locked in stables, hay was sprinkled over the roofs, and they were set on fire. The remaining 43,000 Jews were driven in groups to the nearby forest, stripped of their belongings, knelt at the edge of a ravine and shot in the back of the neck. The killing lasted several days. The corpses were incinerated. The cremations continued until February 1942. In Golta alone, more than 50,000 Jews were murdered. In Domanovka, 18,000 more were shot by Ukrainian police. In Akhmechetka, between 4,000 and 14,000 died of disease and hunger in a former pig farm. Under Antonescu's regime, Transnistria was the cemetery for between 220,000 and 260,000 Jews, and for up to 20,000 Romani people. On October 16, 1941, after 70 days of fierce siege, Romanian forces entered Odessa. The city designated by Antonescu as the capital of Transnistria had cost more than 98,000 Romanian casualties since they crossed the Dniester, nearly 19,000 dead, 68,000 wounded, and more than 11,000 missing. The euphoria lasted 6 days. On October 22, Soviet agents blew up the former NKVD headquarters on Engels Street, where Romanian General Ioan Glogogeanu had installed his base of operations. 61 people died, including the general, 16 officers, 35 soldiers, and 9 civilians. 4 German naval officers also died. Antonescu ordered immediate reprisals. His instructions were precise in their monstrosity. For each Romanian or German officer killed in the explosion, 200 communists would be hanged. For each soldier, 100 communists. The executions had to occur that same day. In the following 48 hours, several hundred Jews and communists were hanged or shot. Thousands of Jews were forced to march on foot to Dalnik, on the outskirts of the city. The intervention of Odessa Mayor German Pantea and Acting Commander General Nicolae Masici caused the column to be returned, but not before the Jews at the head were pushed into 4 large warehouses that were then doused with gasoline and burned. The report of a German officer in Bucharest to Berlin in November 1941 mentioned that, on the morning of October 23, some 19,000 Jews were shot in a port square surrounded by a wooden fence. Their corpses were doused with gasoline and burned. A month later, in a meeting of the Council of Ministers on November 13, Antonescu asked Governor Alexianu, "Was the repression severe enough?" And upon receiving confirmation that the Jews had been shot and hanged in the streets of Odessa, he responded, "That is how one must act." In January 1942, Alexianu ordered the deportation to northern Transnistria of the 40,000 remaining Jews in Odessa. They began on January 11. Daily, columns of 1,500 people, men, women, children, elderly and sick, were marched from the Odessa ghetto to the train station to be deported to Berezovka and other camps where most would die of disease, hunger and cold. Romania has committed more troops than all of Germany's other allies combined. This phrase from Marshal Antonescu in the summer of 1942 summarized both the pride and the tragedy of Romanian participation in the war. By October 1942, nearly 900,000 Romanian soldiers were fighting alongside Germany on the Eastern Front, from Crimea to the Caucasus. And then came Stalingrad. The Romanian Third Army, under General Petre Dumitrescu, was deployed north of Stalingrad to protect the right flank of German General Friedrich von Paulus's Sixth Army. The Romanian Fourth Army, under General Constantin Constantinescu, was placed to the south. Each of its divisions, formed by only 7 battalions, had to cover a front of 20 kilometers. They were severely under-equipped, without heavy artillery, with very few anti-tank weapons, armed mainly with old 37mm horse-drawn cannons that Russian soldiers had nicknamed door knockers because their projectiles could not penetrate the armor of the T-34 tank. On November 19, 1942, the Soviet 21st Army and the Soviet 5th Tank Army broke the Romanian Third Army's front on the Don. German neighbors of the Romanian 20th Infantry Division observed masses of Soviet tanks and waves of infantry in quantities never seen before advancing against the Romanians. The German commander of the adjacent battalion, Major Bruno Gaebele, learned that the neighboring Romanian regiment only had a single horse-drawn 3.7 cm pack for its entire sector. Even so, the Romanian soldiers fought with bravery. The next day, November 20, the Soviet 51st and 57th Armies broke the Romanian 4th Army's front to the south. 5 Romanian infantry divisions under General Mihail Lascar from the 3rd Army were surrounded southwest of Raspopinskaya and were forced to surrender on November 24 when they ran out of ammunition. Soviet forces took more than 30,000 Romanian prisoners and all their equipment. The total losses of the Romanian 3rd and 4th Armies between November 19, 1942 and January 7, 1943 amounted to 155,010 dead, wounded or missing, mostly prisoners. This represented more than half of Romania's 31 active field divisions and a quarter of all Romanian troops on the Eastern Front. The Romanian Air Corps lost 73 aircraft. In a telegram sent on December 30 to General Steflii, Antonescu accepted historical responsibility. "I assume responsibility before history because I did not do more than I did to avoid the massacre of the armies. which was due to the chivalrous attitude of the German command, the total lack of foresight, and the passivity with which it received the warning signals. The defeat at Stalingrad marked a decisive turning point. The Germans unfairly blamed the Romanians for the collapse, ignoring that their own inadequacies in the supply of anti-tank weapons had been the primary cause of Romanian vulnerability. Field Marshal Friedrich von Paulus, commander of the German Sixth Army, paid posthumous tribute to Romanian courage. The fighting spirit and leadership demonstrated by the Romanian units in the army under my command deserve a special mention. With the help of German heavy weapons, these troops fought with bravery and showed great firmness in the face of all the privations to which they were subjected. But Paulus's words did not return the dead. In the summer of 1942, Adolf Eichmann presented his plan to the Romanian government. The remaining Jews of Romania from the Banat, southern Transylvania, Wallachia and Moldavia would be deported on special trains to the Lublin district in occupied Poland. Those fit for work would work. The rest would receive the special treatment, a euphemism that even then meant extermination. On July 22, 1942, Hauptsturmführer Gustav Richter, advisor for Jewish affairs at the German legation in Bucharest, informed Berlin that Ion Antonescu had given his agreement to the plan. On July 26, Heinrich Himmler was informed that preparations were underway and that the first in a series of trains would depart around September 10. The trains never left. The Romanian representatives summoned to the Berlin conference, organized by Eichmann on September 26, to coordinate the train schedules, did not appear. A German railway expert sent to Bucharest to make the arrangements returned empty-handed. The deportations to the extermination camps in Poland were never carried out. Why did Antonescu change his mind? The Marshal never explained it directly. It was probably the confluence of several factors. First, international pressure. The US government, through Secretary of State Cordell Hull, threatened measures against Romanians living in the United States if deportations to Transnistria did not stop. Apostolic Nuncio Andrea Casulo, Swiss Representative René de Weck, Metropolitan of Transylvania Nicolae Barlan, and Queen Mother Helen pressured Antonescu directly. Second, the deterioration of the military situation after Stalingrad, which made an Allied victory and a process of responsibilities more likely. Third, the argument of sovereignty deporting Romanian Jews to Poland meant handing them over to a foreign power, which Antonescu interpreted as an unacceptable violation of Romanian sovereignty. In a meeting of the Council of Ministers on October 13, 1942, Mihai Antonescu announced the suspension of all transports of Jews beyond the Dniester. The consequence of this decision was of a formidable historical importance. In its 2004 evaluation, the International Commission on the Holocaust in Romania, chaired by Elie Wiesel, concluded that while in Romania between 280,000 and 380,000 Romanian and Ukrainian Jews died under Antonescu's regime, it is estimated that some 375,000 Jews survived mainly in Wallachia, Moldavia, and southern Transylvania. The Commission's final report was brutally clear. Of all the allies of Nazi Germany, Romania bears the responsibility for the greatest number of deaths of Jews after Germany itself. The murders committed in Iasi, Odessa, Bogdanovka, Domanovka, and Petioara are among the most horrific crimes committed against Jews during the Holocaust. Romania perpetrated genocide against the Jews, but also if Antonescu had yielded to the German demands of 1942, the 375,000 surviving Jews would have been deported to Auschwitz. The historian Denis Deletant summarized it precisely. Antonescu was a war criminal who ordered the death of tens of thousands of Jews in Transnistria, and at the same time, the man whose refusal to implement the final solution in its German version saved more Jews than any other leader of a country allied with the Axis. This paradox is the irreconcilable contradiction at the heart of Ion Antonescu's legacy. Jews were not the only victims of the regime's purification policy. In May 1942, Antonescu made the decision to deport certain categories of Romani to Transnistria. Nomads and those with criminal records were the first to be identified. A census conducted on May 25 recorded 40,909 Romani susceptible to deportation, of whom 9,471 were nomads and 31,438 belonged to the selected sedentary categories. Deportations began on June 1, 1942. Nomadic Romani were gathered by the gendarmerie in county capitals and driven on foot with their wagons from one gendarmerie post to another on a journey that lasted weeks. In September 1942, 9 special trains with sedentary Romani crossed the Dniester. In total, more than 25,000 Romani were deported to Transnistria. The conditions were analogous to those of the Jews: unheated barracks, no sanitation, no medical care, with insufficient food rations. A report from the Ochakov County Police of December 5, 1942 described some Romani whose lower regions are completely uncovered. No soap has been supplied to them since they arrived, and as a result, they have not been able to wash either themselves or the single shirt they have. The exact figure of Romani dead in Transnistria has never been precisely established. A gendarmerie census in May 1944 found only 6,000 survivors of the more than 25,000 deported. It is almost certain that more than half died. Unlike the Jewish deportations, there were no organized mass executions of Romani. Death came through deliberate negligence, hunger, and disease. It was a genocide by abandonment. As the Red Army advanced westward throughout 1943 and 1944, the certainty of German defeat became inevitable for any lucid observer. Ion Antonescu, the foreign minister, not the marshal, began to probe the possibilities of an armistice through diplomatic channels in Madrid, Lisbon, Stockholm, and Ankara. In January 1943, Mihai himself had given signs of change to Italian Minister Bessarabia in Bucharest, who travelled to Rome to present a report to Italian Foreign Minister Galeazzo Ciano. The latter noted in his diary on January 19, "Bessarabia has made a report on his long conference with the young Antonescu, who returned from German headquarters. The latter was very explicit about the tragic condition of Germany and foresees the necessity for Romania and Italy to contact the Allies to establish a defense against the Bolshevization of Europe." Mussolini rejected the proposal. The Marshal tolerated these contacts, although publicly he maintained his loyalty to Hitler. On April 12, 1943, at Klesheim Castle in Salzburg, Hitler directly confronted Antonescu with the information from his intelligence services about the contacts in Madrid and asked him to analyze them. The Marshal promised loyalty until the end and committed to investigate the Romanian minister's action in Madrid. What Hitler did not know was that Antonescu was perfectly aware of Mihai's efforts and had no real intention of stopping them. They were his insurance policy for when German defeat was irreversible. In their last encounter on August 5, 1944, at Hitler's headquarters in Rastenburg, the Führer asked if Romania intended to keep fighting. Antonescu responded that it depended on German military support. He returned to Bucharest in deep depression and without having made any decision. Meanwhile, King Michael and a circle of trusted advisors, General Sănătescu, Grigore Niculescu Buzesti from the Foreign Ministry, and Ion Mocsoni Sturcia, Marshal of the Royal Household, had been secretly planning for months the overthrow of Antonescu. The king established contact with the leaders of the Democratic Parties Iuliu Maniu of the National Peasants' Party and Constantin Bratianu of the National Liberal Party, as well as with Lucreciu Patrascanu of the Romanian Communist Party, who also brought in Emil Bodnaras, a Soviet NKVD officer known as Engineer Chiausu, who could organize armed groups of communist workers to support the coup in the streets of Bucharest. The National Democratic Bloc was formed on June 20, 1944, bringing together the 4 main parties. The plan was for the Marshal to be invited to the palace for an audience, and if he refused to sign an immediate armistice, he would be detained. The original date was set for August 26, but circumstances moved it forward by 3 days. On August 20, Soviet generals Malinovsky and Tolbukin launched a massive offensive of nearly 1 million troops and 1,500 tanks against the German-Romanian forces on the Prut. The front broke south of Iasi. The king, alerted that Antonescu intended to return to the front on August 23, which would take him out of Bucharest on the day set for the coup, advanced the operation. August 23, 1944, in the afternoon. Antonescu arrived at the palace. The king presented him with the military situation in detail and asked him to immediately sign an armistice with the Allies. The marshal responded that he would only do so after warning Hitler. Michael told him that the situation admitted no further delays. The Soviets were already on Romanian territory. Antonescu insisted, as a soldier of honor, he could not stab an ally in the back with whom he had fought for 3 years. When the king offered that he leave power to someone willing to sign the armistice, and Antonescu responded, "Never," Michael stepped out briefly to his office, signaled to his aide, Colonel Ion Antonescu, and ordered the arrest. Ionescu summoned the 4 guards prepared for this eventuality. Amid the marshal's protests, the 2 Antonescus, Ion and Mihai, were escorted upstairs and locked in the king's safe room. A few hours later, Bodnaras and a group of armed workers took custody of the prisoners and transferred them to a safe house in the Vatra Luminoasa neighborhood. On August 31, Soviet units took them into custody and transferred them by truck to the Soviet border, where a train awaited them bound for Moscow. King Michael announced the coup d'etat and the immediate cessation of hostilities against the Allies over the radio to the country. The words resonated on every radio in Romania that night. Romania was passing from the Axis side to the Allied side. In a matter of hours, Romanian troops who had fought for 3 years alongside Germany received the order to fight against it. Not a single senior general disobeyed the new Supreme Chief's order. It was the most eloquent proof that the army's loyalty belonged to the king, not the marshal. The German reaction was furious. Stukas bombed Bucharest during the following days, causing significant damage to the city centre. German units tried to force their way into the capital, but were repelled by Romanian troops, who in some cases went from allies to enemies in a matter of minutes. By the end of August, Soviet troops were entering Bucharest and Antonescu's regime belonged to history. Romania had completed in less than a week one of the fastest and most consequential strategic turns of the entire Second World War. The change of sides was not just a diplomatic gesture, it was a military transformation of the first magnitude. Romania contributed more than 538,000 soldiers to the struggle against its former ally. Romanian troops fought in northern Transylvania, reconquered by October 1944, in Hungary, in Czechoslovakia, and in Austria. They reached as far as Brno and the outskirts of Prague. The costs were enormous, more than 169,822 dead in combat against Germany and Hungary between August 1944 and May 1945, added to the 71,585 dead on the Soviet front between 1941 and 1944. A special correspondent for the Sunday Times wrote on January 7, 1945, "It is not generally recognized that among the nations today fighting against Germany in Europe, Romania holds 4th place in terms of men mobilized. It has 14 divisions fighting with the Russian armies, while France, for example, only has 7 in the field." The Paris Peace Treaty, signed on February 10, 1947, confirmed the geopolitical realities of the new Europe. Bessarabia and Northern Bukovina remained in Soviet hands. Southern Dobruja remained in Bulgaria. But northern Transylvania, the supreme objective of all Antonescu's sacrifices, was returned to Romania. The dream of Romania Mare survived, though amputated. The price was catastrophic. Ion Antonescu was arrested at the Royal Palace on August 23, 1944, by order of King Michael. He was initially moved to a safe house in the Vatra Luminoasa neighborhood of Bucharest, guarded by guards from the Communist Party. On August 31, Soviet Lieutenant General Tevchenkov arrived with 40 officers to take the prisoners. Antonescu and his collaborators, Mihai Antonescu, General Pantazi and others, were taken by truck to the Soviet border and embarked on a train bound for Moscow. In the Soviet capital, Antonescu was interrogated by Vsevolod Merkulov. Lavrenti Beria's lieutenant. The detention conditions in the Ljubljanka prison were significantly better than those in the Romanian prison to which he would be returned. On November 8, 1944, the marshal attempted suicide with a rope made of strips of sheets, but he was discovered in time by Vasiliu. On April 4, 1946, the Soviet ambassador informed the Romanian government, now controlled by the Communist Party, through the figure of Petru Groza, that the USSR agreed to hand over Antonescu to be tried in Romania. The trial began on May 6, 1946, before the People's Tribunal, in an ordinary building on Ștërbe Voda Street in Bucharest. The judges were communists. The prosecutors were communists. Public access was controlled by communist authorities. Burton Y. Berry, the U.S. political representative in Bucharest, reported to Washington, "The Romanians feel that the marshal is being tried by Russia, whose army occupies the country." During 10 days of interrogations, Antonescu showed himself dignified and defiant. He accepted responsibility for the reprisals in Odessa. He justified the campaign beyond the Dniester as a military necessity. He described the deportations from Bessarabia and Bukovina as security measures in a war zone. The novelist George Calinescu, who attended the trial as a newspaper director, described the marshal, "He is a man of placid but solid nerves, of military education, without particular intellectual complications. His hands and jaws tremble discreetly, and he presses his lips to repress an intermittent sigh. When the light turns on for filming, he suddenly assumes an authoritative and statuary profile and maintains it with determination while the camera runs." On May 17, 1946, Ion Antonescu was sentenced to death. His lawyers appealed. The appeal was rejected on May 31. King Michael, under pressure from the communist government, let the legal procedure proceed. On June 1, 1946, at 6 in the evening, Antonescu was led along with Mihai Antonescu, Constantin Vasiliu, and Georg Alexianu to an open field in the Jilava prison known as the Valley of the Peach Trees. Each was placed in front of a wooden post. Only Vasiliu accepted a blindfold. Moments before the execution squad aimed, Ion Antonescu raised his felt hat in salute and fell, like his companions, under a volley of fire. The commanding officer administered the coup de grace. He was 63 years old. In a final letter to his wife, written after learning the sentence, Antonescu had written, "My dear Rika, I have stood with my head high before the court, just as I stand before the supreme judgment. No one in this country has served the ordinary people with as much love and interest as I have. Circumstances and people did not allow us to do the good that together we so much wanted to do for our country. The supreme will decided so. I have failed. Others have also failed, many others. After the correct judgment of history has assigned them their place, it will also determine ours. Peoples everywhere throughout history have been ungrateful. I regret nothing, and you should regret nothing." Romania emerged from the Second World War with a balance as complex as the history of almost any other nation. It had fought on the German side for 3 years, contributing decisively to the Axis war effort with oil, raw materials, and blood. It had perpetrated systematic war crimes, the Iasi pogrom, the massacres of Bessarabia and Bukovina, the Transnistria extermination camps that caused the death of between 280,000 and 380,000 Jews and an undetermined number of Romani. And then, in August 1944, it had turned 180 degrees and fought against Germany, contributing more troops to the Allied coalition than any other former Axis member except Italy. The Paris Peace Treaty of February 10, 1947, recognized the recovery of northern Transylvania, Antonescu's supreme geopolitical objective, but ratified the loss of Bessarabia and northern Bukovina to the USSR and southern Dobruja to Bulgaria. The Marshal's Great Compromise, the alliance with Hitler to recover the territories lost in 1940, had produced partial results at a devastating cost. Under the communist regime installed in 1947, the history of the war was radically falsified. The role of Antonescu's Romania in the Holocaust was erased from textbooks. Romanian soldiers killed on the Soviet front between 1941 and 1944 were denied official commemoration, It was too embarrassing to acknowledge that they had fought against the USSR. The Military Museum in Bucharest presented the Romanian war record starting in 1944. It was as if the first 3 years of the war had not existed. Under Ceausescu, the partial rehabilitation of Antonescu began starting in the 70s. The novelist Marin Preda turned him into a central character of his novel Delirul, 1975, presenting him as a tragic figure caught between superior historical forces. The Marshal's patriotism, his obsession with recovering the lost territories, tuned in perfectly with the autarkic nationalism of the Ceausescu regime. But the Holocaust remained a forbidden topic. Neither Preda nor any other authorized writer mentioned the fate of the Jews of Transnistria. After 1989, the debate over Antonescu became one of the most politically toxic issues of Romanian democracy. In 1991, the parliament stood in a minute of silence in honor of the Marshal on the anniversary of his execution. President Ion Antonescu, in an interview published in July 2003 in the digital version of the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, denied that there had been a Holocaust in Romania in the terms in which the term is normally understood. It was President Emil Constantinescu who, in a message of May 4, 1997, officially recognized for the first time collective Romanian responsibility in the Holocaust. In October 2003, President Iliescu, yielding to international pressure, announced the formation of the International Commission on the Holocaust in Romania, chaired by Elie Wiesel. The November 2004 report was unambiguous. Romania perpetrated genocide against the Jews. The survival of some Jews in certain parts of the country does not change this reality. Ion Antonescu is perhaps the most impossible figure to judge from the entire Second World War. He was the most competent military man Romania produced in the 20th century. He was a genuine patriot whose love for his country was constant and unequivocal. He was the man who maintained Romanian sovereignty when others would have capitulated to German demands, as demonstrated by his resistance to implementing the final solution against the Jews of Wallachia and Moldavia. He was the conductor of a dictatorship that allowed democratic opposition parties to hold meetings and send him protest letters without arresting their leaders, a tolerance that no other European Axis ruler would have exhibited. And at the same time, he was the man who ordered the deportations from Bessarabia and Bukovina, knowing that the convoys would march toward death. He was the marshal who ordered in Odessa the execution of 200 civilians for every officer killed in the NKVD bombing. He was the conductor whose regime was responsible for the largest massacre of Jews perpetrated by an ally of Germany outside of Germany itself. The American historian Irina Livizeanu summarized the contradiction precisely. Antonescu was a war criminal who sent tens of thousands of Jews to death in Transnistria and yet refused to send other Romanian Jews to the death camps of Poland. He was an anti-Semite, and yet, despite the deportations, more Jews survived under his rule than in any other country within Axis Europe. Denis Dilettant, the Marshal's most rigorous biographer, concluded in his 2006 work, "For the Jews of Bukovina and Bessarabia, Antonescu was a cruel anti-Semite. For those of Moldavia, Wallachia, and southern Transylvania, he was a providential anti-Semite. That cruel paradox redeemer, murderer who saves lives, patriot who leads his nation to catastrophe is that of Romania itself in the Second World War. A country that lost a third of its territory in 3 months of 1940 and recovered the most beloved regions at the cost of participating in some of the most atrocious crimes of the century. A country whose soldiers fought with equal bravery alongside Germany on the Don and against Germany in the Carpathians. A country that perpetrated genocide and at the same time saved more Jews than any other member of the Axis. Romania was not a passive victim of the Second World War, nor was it simply a perpetrator without nuances. It was a fully active moral actor, with all the complexity, contradiction, and tragedy that statement implies. To understand Romania in the Second World War is not to simplify. It is to learn that history rarely obeys clean moral categories, that nations, like human beings, can do good and evil simultaneously. that the weight of geography and the pressure of circumstances can lead to decisions of monstrous consequences for men who believed themselves to be defenders of their people, and that the duty of memory is precisely to resist that temptation to simplify, to remember without manipulating, to condemn without caricaturing, to understand without absolving, because the dead of Bogdanovka deserve that honesty as much as the Romanian soldiers who died in Marasesti in 1917 or in Stalingrad in 1942.